difficult transition, if you will, from yesterday's, don't want to sugarcoat it by calling it an event, by yesterday's insurrection to come to an event about zero waste living. But I will say, having spent the year leading the Conservancy through a global pandemic and a number of other challenges, I have found that Rock Creek is such a wonderful place where, so I've heard from so many of you that it provides respite and is restorative. And I know I found peace running amongst the woods this morning. So I think that spending a little time today, not watching the news, but rather thinking about ways that we can all be more effective stewards of Rock Creek is a really appropriate way, among many others, to honor the needs of our country and our community right now. So I am really grateful to Seema Thomas, who is an adjunct lecturer at the University of the District of Columbia, one of our HBCUs here in Washington, DC. And Seema is also a cleanup event leader for the Conservancy. We thank you for that, so dedicated to the mission. Seema is going to moderate a conversation with Stephanie Joy Miller and Julie Lawson, and I will let Seema introduce the two of them and get us started with that conversation now. Thank you, Seema.
Thank you, Jeannie. In 2020, I felt many moments of powerlessness. So for me in particular, it's exciting to be here today to moderate a discussion with two amazing speakers on ways we can use our power in the choices we make to have impact. Over the past few years, I began delving into all types of different waste, thinking about the term, and I use it in air quotes, wasted opportunities, and how we can reframe our discussion on waste. A stat that I want to share, this is according to the Frontier Group, the US produces more than 30% of the planet's total waste, though it is home to only 4% of the world's population. And to give you more perspective, Columbia University study estimates that Americans throw out close to 7 pounds of materials per person each day. I think this is really important. Communities at UDC, I teach urban sustainability, and we're constantly thinking about these tough choices regarding waste and their consequences. And to address this sheer volume, the complexity and the diversity of waste, we really need to rethink our relationship with it and making it a front burner issue for anyone. Many of my undergraduate students in urban sustainability did cleanups at Rock Creek Park, and I just want to say hello and a shout out to them. I see a few of them here. In our class discussions, we were astonished at the different types of waste found at this beautiful place, which is not even intended to have waste. So it prompted many discussions in class on how to rethink and reframe our relationship with waste. So to explore waste together, I would like to introduce our speakers for tonight. Today with us, we have Stephanie Joy Miller and Julie Lawson. Stephanie Miller is the author of Zero Waste Living, the 80-20 Way, the busy person's guide to a lighter footprint. She founded Zero Waste in DC to focus on the application of zero waste strategies that have a real and sustainable impact. With the goal of reaching as wide of an audience as possible, she provides advisory services to individual households, as well as community and corporate presentations. Within her 25-year career at the International Finance Corporation, IFC, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank, she served as a director of IFC's Climate Business Department, where she led global teams to find innovative solutions to climate change. Julie Lawson, our next speaker, currently serves as the director of Mayor Muriel Bowser's Office of the Clean City in Washington, DC. She works closely with the mayor and district agencies to execute the Clean City Initiative, coordinate service delivery operations, and oversee community engagement efforts. Previously, she co-founded and was the executive director of Trash Free Maryland, a nonprofit organization that uses policy and behavior change to create long-term solutions to trash pollution. Her work led to the nation's first disposable shopping bag fee and even a ban on microbeads in personal care products in Maryland. Under her leadership, Trash Free Maryland also conducted the largest citizen science survey of microplastic pollution in the Chesapeake Bay. So with that, I would like to begin and start exploring waste with our speakers. So my first question is for Stephanie. And Stephanie, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your book and why you wrote it.
Great, thank you, Seema. And I just first want to say I'm delighted to join this conversation with you, Seema, with Julie, who's so accomplished in so many of the things that I care about, and to Jeannie for hosting this. And I also want to acknowledge Melanie Chukas-Bradley, who is, as you said, on this call. She's the one who introduced me to Jeannie, and she's a fellow Changemakers Books author, and I think a great steward of Rock Creek. So why did I write the book? So I wrote it because I wanted to talk to people like me, the me of 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I was a busy professional working, as you said, at the International Finance Corporation. I had always been attracted to this idea of zero waste living. I actually didn't know exactly what it was, but I liked the idea of it. But for my entire career, I had been a really busy person, and I didn't find time to do the things that I knew were right for the environment, things like recycling well, buying products that are good for the environment, reducing my single-use plastic. And I felt this way while I was actually leading climate business at IFC. So it was my job to help governments and private sector get on a more sustainable path. And I would come home and feel sort of busy, exhausted, and paralyzed by, felt daunting. And I wasn't really sure I could make a difference in any case. And then a couple years ago, after 25 years in the same organization, I decided to leave the organization, take a gap year, as I called it, spend a bit of time with my son, who was heading off to college. And I found myself with time on my hands for the first time in a really long time. And I decided I would try to see what I could do to tackle my personal waste and carbon footprint. And basically, I didn't quite know where to start, but there was one thing that I really had wanted to do for a long time, and that was to go into my dry cleaners. I was a regular customer, and to ask them if they'd be willing to put my dry cleaning into a reusable garment bag that I had instead of the plastic wrap, and that had always bothered me how much of this plastic I was going through every week. To my surprise, it was not a big deal. They agreed to do it, and I started to wonder if I could do a little bit more on this front. So I got them to agree to adopt a reusable bag program. And long story short, today, 1/3 of their customers use these. So when you walk into the dry cleaners today, you see about, this sea of plastic, but interspersed these 360 bags they've convinced their clients to use the reusable bags. So I started wondering what else I could do. That was kind of a quick win. It happened within a matter of months, a couple months. And it was about this time when a friend introduced me to this concept of zero waste living. And, this movement to reduce consumption and reduce waste had a lot of appeal. And I loved the intersection with climate change, because obviously anything we do to reduce waste and consumption reduces the energy needed to produce it, and therefore contributes positively to climate change. And so I read everything I could on the subject. I was really inspired by the zero waste gurus out there that show their 1 year's worth of trash in a glass mason jar. And I was really awed by that. I was really excited by that. I started doing a lot of what they were recommending in these books. And I was also quite daunted after a while, because I realized I was going to be going back to work, and there was no way I could continue doing all the things that I was doing that were recommended. So I then remembered this concept, which some of you may know. I find when I talk to people about it, half the people I talk to know about it, half don't, but it's this 80-20 rule, this idea we used to talk about all the time in my workplace, which was, we get 80% of our business from 20% of our clients.
You better put a tether on Jacob. Tracking device.
I am going to just remind everyone to please mute yourselves as you enter the Zoom.
Can you hear me now?
Thank you. Sorry about that,
Okay.
Stephanie.
No, that's okay. So 80-20, this idea that not all actions are equal, that if you focus on about the 20% most impactful things, you can have 80% of the results approximately. And so I got excited about this and I thought maybe there's a way to apply this to zero waste living. And I read everything I could on this, visited recycling facilities, talked to plastics experts, waste experts of all kinds, and came up with a much smaller set of actions that we could take that that fit this, what I would call 80-20 rule. And my criteria for this was it had to be really easy and it had to be really impactful. And so I wrote the book to help other busy people like I was 2 years ago and I am now to get to the 80% of zero waste with very little effort.
Wow, no, that's amazing, especially during a gap year and taking that 80-20 framework and applying it for making it easy yet impactful. So we'll come back to that. I guess for the next question that I have is for Julie. And Julie, for shifting gears a little bit, and we're thinking a little bit more about the macro level, how can the systems around us make it easier for everyone, especially when we think with respect to waste? And also with that is worrying about waste and having the time and the resources to think about waste a luxury?
It's an interesting question. And I'm going to say it's not. And the reason is I got into trash because I was raised with the idea that we should leave everything better than we found it. My dad would always make us clean up the campsite after a camping trip and not just pick up our own stuff, but anything anybody else had left behind. And when I looked at the environmental world a while back, earlier in my career, and I was looking for something that could really be a good on-ramp for people, for everybody, it was trash. And it's the litter in your community and the what that does to your quality of life. And that affects everyone, whether you are totally motivated by Save the Whales and deep sea marine science and all of the investment required for that, or you just want your trash picked up and you want someone to stop littering in your front yard, and how that blight makes you feel at the end of the day, that's a universal feeling. And so there are things that everybody can do. And we really focus, I really like Stephanie's approach on what the behavioral science behind this is. Of like, I'm busy, I can only accommodate so much into my life. And you hear that the same in overburdened neighbors who have a lot of day-to-day stress, just trying to get to work, manage their families, manage their finances. And they may not have big LinkedIn profiles or anything like that, but a lot of their day-to-day is very stressful. But this is still an issue for them. And that getting control of your trash, the data of research, behavioral research really shows that has benefit on your mental health. That we've seen depression rates go down when we clean up vacant lots in neighborhoods. So I don't think that this is a luxury issue. This affects everyone. It affects, whether it's overburdened communities in our own city or third world countries that are dealing with our waste management mispractices here and dealing with the burden on the other end of that process, and they don't have the proper infrastructure. So I also really appreciated Stephanie's comment about how she worked with her dry cleaner to change the bag use. There's so much power for consumers to change things. Businesses will react to consumer demand. And the simple act of making it normal to use a garment bag or to take a reusable container to the deli or to a restaurant for your meats and seafood or your leftover restaurant meal in normal times, maybe not right now. All of that, making that more acceptable. And I think we saw that locally with disposable bag fees in DC and in Montgomery County, but not in Prince George's County. The reusable bag adoption rate in the two jurisdictions that had the fees was really high, and the stores got really used to using them. And then you'd go to a store in Prince George's County where they don't yet have a bag law for a variety of reasons, but the stores just weren't accustomed to it. And they slowly have gotten better with it, but there is a lot of power to just the drumbeat of the consumer requests.
Thank you, Julie. And with that, speaking of the individual consumer, Stephanie, if we're bringing it down to the micro level, what are easy ways we can individually be good stewards with respect to reducing waste?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples, but I hope we can come back to this point that Julie was just making, because I think this one of the things that was really exciting to me when I was doing some research for the book was figuring out the power of social norms. It is so incredible. Anyway, so I hope we can get back to that. But yes, in terms of what we can do as individuals, I mean, the way I looked at it, I came up with 3 themes where I think we can, again, look at easy things and impactful things. And for me, they converge on 3 themes. One I won't spend too much time talking about is food, but that was probably the biggest surprise for me, was how important food waste and plant-based diet is probably not so surprising to many of us, are in terms of carbon footprints, and also composting. I was not a composter 2 years ago, and I'm a huge fan of it now, and I now compost myself. The thing I wanted to focus on is maybe the other 2 themes. One is purge plastics, and the other one is recycle right. That's what I call them for shorthand. But you know, when people think about plastic, I think it becomes, for many people, overwhelming to try to figure out where they can make a difference. And the advice that I give, I give it in the book and I give it every time I talk to people, is just pick one thing. Pick one thing that you know you consume on a frequent basis, every day or every week. Find the non-plastic packaged alternative to that thing, and there almost always is one, and commit to never buying that product in plastic again. And for me, it was my stainless steel water bottle, which I carry with me everywhere. Before the pandemic and when I was working full time, I'm embarrassed to say I was buying a couple of water bottles in plastic every day. And I had all kinds of ways I rationalized that to myself. But anyway, that was my thing. And once I decided, it meant that if I forget this, I will be thirsty, or I'll drink from a water fountain, maybe not so much now during the pandemic. But you make that kind of commitment, you start to see the difference. And I'm quite convinced that, I love Julie's term on-ramp. I was going to say, for me, when you pick something, it becomes a gateway to consciousness, to awareness about how much plastic you yourself and we are consuming. And so if you start with one thing, I at least this is what happened to me, and this is what happens to, I think, a lot of people, is, I forget what the German term is, but you start to see it everywhere. You know, it's almost like you take off your glasses and you see how much plastic is everywhere. And then you want to try to do something about it. And if you want to go beyond your water bottle, I guess the second piece of advice I give is around the audit of your recycle bin, which sounds like a really boring thing. But the purpose of it is twofold. One is to make sure that you're recycling correctly, because there are huge implications to recycling incorrectly from a climate perspective, from a contamination perspective. But But the second thing, and when you do an audit, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second, figuring out what you're doing right is important, but also figuring out what you can reduce is really important. So, you know, I could give you, there are many books about how to reduce plastic in your life, but I think most of us, my life is not the same as yours, Seema's. And when you empty out your recycle bin, you start to get a reveal, you know, you start to get a sense of what are your habits and what are the areas, what are the things you're consuming most frequently that you could start to find alternatives for. So going beyond your, you know, equivalent of the plastic water bottle and finding some of those other things. The audit is a really simple process. You just, you know, most of us get our recycling bin picked up once a week. The day before you get it picked up, you put it all out, you divide it up into the groupings that the materials recycling facilities groups them in: glass and metals and paper and cardboard and plastic. And you start to really look at, it doesn't take more than 15-20 minutes, but you start to look at what do you have in those piles that you could do something about. And I'm quite convinced that when you it's like any audit, right? You reveal a lot by looking at the data. And then if you do it again in 6 months, you can see if you've improved. But that was the way I figured out that we were going through an enormous amount of plastic in the cereal lining. So I started making homemade granola. Some things we decided we're not going to be able to live without. So anyway, I think that that's a way to have some insight into your own habits and then figure out what you can do about it.
It's a really interesting point, Stephanie. I was thinking about it with my students. We've oftentimes talked about DC government. I think the last time they did a waste sort was maybe in 2007, but I never thought about doing a recycling audit, and especially that connection with reduction as well. It's not just about recycling. I guess my next question is for Julie. And this is, just to actually dig in a little bit more about social norms and maybe picking one type of waste with it. It's thinking about plastic waste and what are some social norms that you've observed from your work and working with different communities and their impacts, I should add.
Yeah. So on the one hand, we started out looking at and when I say we, I've run a lot of different organizations working on trash policy, but it's always in a large coalition. So it's me and a whole bunch of other people. We decided we would settle on the main items that we find as litter in our waterways. And we're really fortunate in DC and now more in Prince George's County, and I think soon in Montgomery County, to have trash traps that catch the trash that floats in our waterways so that it can be sorted and counted. Baltimore has their famous water wheels, trash wheels, and they do similar evaluations to understand 80% of the trash that's pulled out of those trash traps on average is related to food. It's the stuff that we are eating on the go. It's the packaging from food. And to really hit home on Stephanie's point about how important food is to this whole issue, where we have neighborhoods that are food deserts and they have to rely on the corner store and takeout for their meals because grocery stores are too far away for home cooking. We do see more litter because they're just producing all that extra packaging. And what is the quality of life impact on those neighborhoods? But so to the point of 80% of that trash is coming from food. The highest number of items were plastic bags, foam food packaging, expanded polystyrene, and single-use beverage containers, bottles and cans, specifically plastic bottles. We've successfully, and then the fourth one I will point out that we've had a much harder time thinking about in terms of a policy strategy is food wrappers, chip bags, and the wrappings that come around different things, because you can't go shopping with an alternative to that, and there are very few replacement products for that. Whereas with bags, the consumer can make a choice, and with the foam food packaging, the restaurant can replace the package. So those have been much more successful in terms of the legislation piece. I think there's a lot of awareness thanks to social media about drinking straws. And we now see legislation in DC and Montgomery County around that. The other piece of kind of flipping a social norm on its head was that for decades, you know, if you go back to the 70s and the Crying Indian, Keep America Beautiful ads, we've told people not to litter, which then tells people that littering is the norm and we should not do that and we should abstain. And abstention is hard, you know, like you try. How many people last night gave up on dry January? It's much easier to take a positive action, a replacement action. And so my approach to litter campaigns and litter education is everyone can pick up. Trash on the ground comes from more places than just those incorrigible people who are already rebelling against community and dropping stuff on the ground. It's blowing out of trash cans. It's you find money on the ground. Nobody intended to drop money on the ground. So a lot of the trash on the ground didn't come from someone who intentionally dropped it. So there's an obligation on all of us to pick it up. And when we do that, we can bring order back to the community we care about, the park that we care about, the waterway we care about. And we can also feel a lot more calm and sense of pride in the work that we just did to do that. So I'm really working to try to establish that norm on litter is picking up, not telling people don't do that.
No, that's great. It's interesting to think about sort of that continuum. There's the litter, there's the recycling, and then there's just reduction, right? Moving towards that zero waste. And I guess, Stephanie, with that, thinking about norms and, you know, broadly behavior change, what do you do if you're in a household with different goals, right? Where you have different behaviors in one household. And I don't know if you've addressed it in your book, but it would be great to hear your thoughts.
I do in passing, because I think it's an issue. It's probably the most common question I get asked by my friends and my colleagues is, what do you do if not everyone is on board? So I do, a little bit like Julie's, leading with positivity in the, instead of abstaining, taking some positive action. I'm a very big believer in role modeling positive behavior, no blame and shame game. I don't think that really it doesn't get anywhere with anyone. It doesn't get anywhere on listservs. It doesn't get anywhere with your family. So what I did when I realized, for example, on recycling, what it would take to recycle right and how many things I was getting wrong, I started a little house campaign where I explained, this kind of plastic is not recyclable and needs to go in the trash. This kind of plastic needs to go back to the grocery store. And this kind of plastic can go in the recycling bin. And wow, I thought I was really clear about it, but lo and behold, I look at the recycling bin and I see the things that I said don't belong there. So I made a little sign. I created another little bin next to the recycling bin where I indicated the kind of plastic that could go in there because it would go back to the grocery store. I don't know if everybody knows this, but rigid plastic, most rigid plastic that we end up bringing into the house, as single-use plastic is recyclable, especially if it has a little 1 or a little 2 in that triangle. And flexible, stretchy, thin plastic film should not ever be put in the recycling bin. The 90% problem for municipal recycling facilities is plastic bags being put in there. So if you know that broad rule, solid plastics, generally recycling bin, and then plastic film, hopefully the grocery store. You can try to explain it to people, but it's easier if you make little signs and you make it really easy for everyone else. And then I can't say I'm 100% good at this, but I really try hard not to lecture when people in the house get it wrong. And I think my partner, Matt, who was on this, I think he's still on the call, most of the time he feels pretty comfortable saying to me, remind me again, this goes where? and I just happy to tell him and happy he asked. So yeah, I think there's so many excuses or reasons why not to do something. And I think the best path forward is to model really good behavior.
Oh, that's great. And it's interesting to hear you have that separate container with the plastic and just reducing the transaction costs and even the thinking, right? You can just sort of drop it, and the fewer steps, the easier it gets, I think, in many ways.
Yeah.
Now, for you, Julie, especially since you have a city government perspective, but you also have the citizen activist also within you, what are some of the ways or most effective ways for individuals to affect change through their politically appointed officials and others as well?
Oh man, that's a heavy question. I did not get approval for that answer. So we are pleased that we've been working on a project with the US EPA's Trash-Free Waters program for the past 6 months to help residents properly dispose of their trash. And to Stephanie's point, that it's not just the one green sheep in the family that does everything, that there's, you know, you've got your kids taking the trash out, and making sure that everything is getting recycled or disposed of properly. The Trash-Free Waters program really focused on disposal of household trash that goes in, if you're in DC, in the green can, and really wanting to see what the impact was of proper disposal on litter in our neighborhoods. So we distribute it, and I actually have it handy, and I didn't plan this, promise. The sticker that we gave to 8,000 homes, including 4,000 of them in the Rock Creek watershed, that talks about making sure that you keep your lid closed, don't overfill the can, bag your trash, but don't bag your recyclables, because don't put plastic bags in that blue bin, please. And make sure you don't put your trash out until right before pickup in order to reduce your rats. And if your can has any damage, you can call or contact 311, the Mayor Citywide Call Center, to get a repair or replacement. But we've asked people to put these on their cans so that every week when they take their trash out, or their kid is taking the trash out, and they don't know the rules, that they can they can see this reminder, this prompt, and then we're going to be taking a look at what that looks like at the litter level in the neighborhoods, as well as how many cans got repaired, because people found out that they could do that. So there's a lot of work going on in my office and within Department of Public Works, especially within the Office of Waste Diversion, to make sure people know how to properly dispose of trash, what they can recycle, what they can't. We also recognize DC is a very transient city, and we can't assume that just because we put education out this year, that everyone living here next year is going to know that. So we've got to do a lot of repetitive and sometimes redundant education to make sure that all of our neighbors are getting the information that they need. But all of the info that you ever could want is on zerowaste.dc.gov or my website, cleancity.dc.gov.
And just one follow-up question to that. How does DC compare to other cities?
So I've worked a lot in Baltimore too. Okay. We rate our neighborhoods. We do litter audits in neighborhoods, and I've rated in both cities on a scale of 1 to 4. DC is tending with 1 being 0 litter and 4 being like, oh my God. The neighborhoods I work in DC tend to average around a 2. They're pretty good. We see usually there's 1 or 2 problem houses, and we know now we need to go do some education with those particular households. And it's the same system that Philadelphia uses and Seattle has used. So we've got this kind of national metric for where our litter levels are. In terms of recycling, that's been a little bit harder to establish. In DC, only 30% of our residential trash is collected by the city. The other 70% is collected, is collected by private haulers. And so it's a little bit harder to get a handle on everything that they're collecting, because they're handling all of our apartment buildings, 4 units and bigger. So that's kind of a on the horizon project we'll be working on.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's good to know that we're doing well, at least. We may not be ahead of the curve, but we're close, at least. The next question for you, Stephanie, and here, I'm thinking about your amazing experience also working at IFC on a global level. And I guess, based on your work and thinking about the importance of collective action, what are some types of climate impacts that we should be aware of or consider here locally within DC, and especially, we're here convened by the Conservancy, thinking about it for Rock Creek as well.
Yeah, so on plastic, I was surprised at how important plastic is from a climate perspective. One of the things that guided me as I was trying to figure out what were the most impactful things that I should focus on was a book, a compilation put together by some scientists called Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever to reverse global warming. And plastics is not explicitly listed as one of the 80 actions that could reverse global warming. There's a section on bioplastics, but that's a little different. It's substituting, right? But what was amazing to me was that by 2050, at the rate at which we're going, because we are increasing our use of single-use plastics, it will be it already is significant, and it will be, the figure I have is it'll be equivalent to about 280 million cars, the production of plastic. So it's something we should all be concerned about from a climate standpoint. It's also something, obviously, when we're talking about Rock Creek and our waterways, we need to be very concerned. Julie talked about all of the litter that ends up I've seen this cartoon or this picture of a gutter or just a street. Yeah, I guess the what do you call it? You pick up the metal. Yeah, where it says the ocean starts here, and I think we really need, I never thought about it that way, but the idea that when you see a plastic water bottle or a mask, a face mask now on the street, which we see, I think, all over the place, if they're on the street and they're not in the bin, they're probably going to end up in some way in the ecosystem. A third, I think, of our plastic that's produced ends up in the ecosystems that we have. And, I was shocked, many of you may have heard the statistic that it's estimated that by 2050, there will be more, by weight, more plastic in the ocean than fish. So it's from a marine pollution, from a climate perspective, and then the actual hazardous waste that's produced from the production at these ethane cracker plants is terrible. I mean, these are cancerous pollutants that are being emitted from these plants. So for lots of reasons, we should be concerned about plastic. We should be concerned about how much is being produced and how it's being disposed of. I think, we've talked about some of the solutions. One of the things we haven't talked a lot about is just completely reducing consumption. And I think, how many of us are willing to make a choice about not buying something if it comes in plastic? I wasn't willing to do that a couple years ago. Now I am. Now, when I go to the grocery store, if I can't find a vegetable or fruit that I want for a recipe that is, it's called naked produce, that's what the zero wasters call it. If it's not out there with no packaging, where I can use my own reusable cotton produce bag to put it in, I won't buy it now. I mean, I do make a couple of exceptions around the holidays, but that's a decision, right? So I do think reduction of consumption across the whole spectrum of what we consume, but in terms of plastic, there are always alternatives. And I think it takes some commitment, but it doesn't have to be a full-time job. That's, I guess, my message.
Yes, no, absolutely. And it's being mindful at each one of those steps, I think, makes such a big difference. So now I'm going to start taking some of the questions that we have in our chat. And the first one, I'm going to just share. This is actually from an urban sustainability student at UDC that I know, William Patterson. And his question that he's asking is, did the cleaners experience any type of savings when they implemented the reusable bag option? I guess this one may go to Julie first.
Probably they mean the dry cleaners experience.
Yes, yes, thank you. Yes, dry cleaners. Yes.
Although Julie,
Gosh.
please chime in.
No, yes, for you, Stephanie.
Yeah, so I was, the part of the story I left out is that from the moment when I got the yes for my own garment bag to that time about 2 weeks later, when I convinced the dry cleaners to adopt this reusable bag program, I was arming myself, I was researching, I was arming myself with all kinds of information. I was going to go in there and make a pitch to them about why this would be so good and what money they would save. And then I went online. It was hard to figure out, but it was cents. I mean, each of these long bags is 1 or 2 cents. And so yes, they absolutely do save some money, but very little. Certainly not enough to convince the owner, it's a husband-wife team, initially to really go whole hog on this. So he was very reluctant. He ordered 20 reusable bags at first. And then he realized how excited his clients were when they saw that they had this option. And I think his business started picking up as a result. So after a while, he got on board and started buying, they ended up buying over 300 bags to sell to customers. But I would love to be able to say that the cost of plastic was high enough to make that a really good business case for him. And it just wasn't. That plastic is so cheap. So that's a problem.
I can add on the, when the DC bag law took effect, we did see savings with the retailers. Obviously, to Stephanie's point, it really depends a lot on volume. A small corner store is only going to see $500 to $1,000 a year savings. But the large grocery stores were seeing millions of dollars of savings by not having to buy as many plastic bags. They were also getting a small portion of the fee back to cover some of their administrative costs. So we have seen, I mean, the DC bag law now is 11 years old. And over that time, we've seen the grocery stores really come around in big support of those programs across the country, which is why we're seeing many, many more of them passing as the major organized retailers get out of the way, so to speak, and really adopt these proposals as something that they can support. So yes, there is a benefit to businesses. It's been interesting also to watch them react to the change in drinking straw requirements, whether that's replacement straws or more prominently just encouraging them not to use straws or find alternatives. One local restaurant chain said that they discovered that if they switched from a tall cup glass where the customer expected a straw and they switched to something short, no one expected the straw, so no one even noticed it was gone.
That's so fascinating. Wow.
Right.
Can I ask Julie a quick question?
Oh,
Seema?
sure. Yeah.
So when I was really crusading on the dry cleaning bag thing, I was wondering whether DC would be open to introducing a tax on dry cleaning plastic as well. Is that something that you've ever considered?
I mean, as it stands right now, the bag law doesn't include those because we're looking at a point of sale choice for the consumer to make that. But certainly, right. I think, as I said, the law's over a decade old, and we have taken considered what it might look like to revisit it. So that is certainly a possibility. I think we'll probably be limited in what we might look at right now, given all the other impacts on our small businesses. But as we look toward a recovery, that could certainly be on the radar.
Okay, great. That's great to hear.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it had been 11 years since the bag tax was instituted, and it's just become sort of the norm, at least here in the district. So that is exciting to know. So the next question we have is from Nancy Roth. And she asks, in DC, we put all materials in the same rolling bin, so we don't have the need to separate plastics from glass, etc. The real problem I have are the instructions from DC DPW for what gets recycled, and it's unclear. I'm constantly uncertain, for example, what I do with the jar lids that are made of something different from the container. Say glass jar with the metal lid, do both go in the bin, etc. So I think it's just a broader question about clarity and those micro decision points that you have to make when you're trying to do something good. So Stephanie, you want to start with it? No.
I'm sure Julie has something to say too, but I will say I visited all of the recycling facilities in the region, and every time I go to one, I come armed with 20 questions, and they're very patient with me. The DC Zero Waste people are amazing. There's a woman there that I end up emailing about once every couple of weeks to ask a question just like Nancy is asking. And I have an Instagram site where I post a recycling tip of the week, because every time I figure something out, I figure everybody else should know this too, because it's hard to find. So yeah, there are some lids in DC, she's from DC. There are some lids that you can keep on, and Julie, please obviously correct me if I have any of this wrong, but there are some lids that you can keep on and it's totally fine. And it's when it's things like milk cartons or juice cartons with the little plastic lid, that's no problem. In some jurisdictions it is, but in DC it's not. It gets more complicated when you've got glass and a metal top, or sometimes you've got these like baking powder, a metalized kind of cardboard can with a plastic top. Those are better to separate because there's no way that the plastic can be kind of integrated into the recycling of the metal and cardboard piece. So it is really, there's kind of an 80-20 rule here too. There's some key things that a lot of people get wrong that are really easy to fix, like the plastic bag problem. But some of these detailed questions, I think, you have to be a recycling nerd like me, or just be willing to take a chance. And I don't like taking chances because I figure, might as well try to get it right. But Julie, please correct me if I've gotten anything wrong or I'm
for sure. A
misquoting.
Rules of thumb. If you're not sure, it's really better to put it in the trash. I know that's hard. We want to wish cycle and believe that whatever we put in that blue bin will probably get recycled, but what you could end up doing is ruining the entire load. So if you're not sure, please just put it in the trash. The second one is that when they are screening at those material recovery facilities, remember the 2-inch by 2-inch rule of thumb. If it's smaller than 2 inches in diameter, it's gonna fall out and it's gonna become contamination. So your lid on your little single serve water bottle, put it back on the bottle, because then it is no longer under 2 inches, it's part of the bottle. If you have a glass jar with a metal lid, and the metal lid is more like a pickle jar and it's like big, those can be separate and they'll both make it through the system. But anything under 2 inches is gonna fall out and become trash. The last thing is that zerowaste.dc.gov has a really awesome what goes where tool, and you can just plug in literally anything. And if it's not there, they capture what you searched for and they will find out what you can do with it. And it will tell you if it's goes in the green bin, the blue bin, if it's hazardous waste, or if it's construction or some other kind of special handling. So that's all on their website, zerowaste.dc.gov. I've been working with the Office of the Chief Technology Officer to create a Twitter bot that will do the same thing. So you could tweet at the Zero Waste handle. It's not ready yet, so don't do this yet, but you could tweet at it what goes where, and it will tell you where to do it over Twitter, just to make it that much more hip to the cool kids. So those three things: don't wish cycle, 2-inch by 2-inch, and what goes where.
So I confess I have done wish cycling. And it's, there's some things that's like, I think so. I'll err on the side, let me put it in there, because it's heartbreaking sometimes to put it in the trash. So just with that, before I get to next question, for both you, Julie, and Stephanie, can you speak a little bit about electronic waste? e-waste, because I think when I think about the composition of waste and the turnaround time, phones are, phone is an example, but of all our electronics, their life expectancy is shorter and shorter, and there's a lot of rare earth materials in them. They pose very different challenges, I think, than some of the other types of waste. So I would just love to hear what, for both of you, your research, your experience with e-waste has been.
I can go first on this one. So in DC, it is illegal to put electronic waste in the trash. And you can actually be fined for it. And it has caused problems when we're dealing with illegal dumping and someone has dumped a TV and a couch, and you can get the couch picked up pretty easily, but the trash truck isn't gonna pick up the TV. So like, that's one of those things I'm working on from the mayor's office perspective. We have an industry-run e-cycle program that all of the electronics manufacturers have entered into an organization that has mandated collection requirements on how much that they have to collect and recycle every year, with escalating amounts based on their sales each year. So the easiest way to dispose of e-waste in DC is Saturdays at Fort Totten Transfer Station from 8 to 3, and then the Thursday before the first Saturday, they also collect. They also, it varies right now based on where we are in our COVID response and protocols, but Department of Energy and Environment has a partnership with with Parks and Recreation and the public libraries to do events at their locations for collection. And then my office, outside of pandemic times, does monthly roll-off days where we also bring in the electronics vendor for drop-off. But that's everything. That's your computers and phones and your TVs and even all the wires and like the headphones that your dog chewed the cord off of, and all of that stuff can go into that kind of disposal. So yeah, and then Montgomery County also has a similar drop-off program at Shady Grove Transfer Station.
That's great. Stephanie, any thoughts?
No, I think Julie answered that really well. Maybe just a related point is I just want to make a plug for reuse. We talk about reduce, reuse, recycle. And this is actually something else. This is disposal, maybe upcycling, extracting what can be extracted, and that is super important. But the reuse piece, I think that, there's something wrong with a lot, of the way this country thinks about, the way consumers think about what they purchase. And I just want to make a plug for a company that I found out about when I was researching the book. It's a local startup called Plastic Tree. And they're still in the early stages, but they will take your things that could be reused. And the reason I think about it in terms of electronics is I remember the founder, I interviewed her for the book, said to me that, they'll take things like a keyboard that's where one key is not working, and they will fix it. And then you don't get it back, you just give it to them and they will find another home for it. So, it's just I'm thinking about absolutely when something is defunct and we don't want to deal with it anymore. And if it's e-waste, it needs to not go in the garbage, as Julie says, and it needs to end up at, if you're in DC, at Fort Totten. But for the things that can be repaired, we're all doing everyone a favor if we can find it a new life, new home.
I'll add also, when the pandemic all started, there was a need in DC, at least everywhere, but especially my personal experience with DC public schools, to get devices into the hands of kids quickly for virtual learning. And we were able to put a call out to neighbors for where are your old tablets, your old laptops that you haven't used, but they still work. And we were able to get a couple dozen out of the neighborhood to give to the school so that kids who didn't have anything could use them. So that kind of stuff, like look for, your buy nothing groups, your schools that could use that kind of stuff. And even for things like bicycles, there are repair and resell organizations like Gear and Up that can teach kids and young adults how to repair bikes. there's lots of different opportunities for that. DOEE also runs fix-it clinics in, again, normal times to show you how to repair your clothing and help you avoid putting textiles into the waste stream too. So all of those different repair and donation venues are really, really powerful ways to reduce your waste.
Yeah, I'm always struck. Many people seem to spend more time researching the electronic they're going to purchase to get the perfect one, but spend almost no time thinking about how to dispose it and how that's sort of disproportionate in many ways. So let's, there was an earlier question from Joelle, and Joelle, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, so I don't think I'm going to attempt it, but this question I believe might be for Julie, and it's thinking, or actually both, but what happens, or what about when council members are reluctant to create a task force on a pressing issue?
Sure. I'm going to broaden that to your elected officials, your decision makers broadly. Frankly, I work for the mayor, but your voices are more powerful than mine in her eyes. And my job is to take what residents say and relay that back up. And so it is really powerful to, even if I already agree with you and I already know that stuff, let me know that kind of, and then we can raise it up the chain. In terms of your council members and your other legislative elected officials, it's a lot of education. It's making sure that they know that this is important to you. I would also make sure that you're engaging with your own neighbors and understanding what's important to them, and ways that you can integrate what's important to you with what's important to them. If people are concerned about parking in your neighborhood, lobbying for enhanced bioretention may not go as well as you think. And figuring out how to educate people that there are benefits to both and how you can make that work. If you can go to the elected official with the proposed solution instead of just complaining about the problem, that is going to get you a lot further down the road, especially if you can take in consideration everything else that they're already working on and dealing with, and see if that can fit into their existing goals as well.
Great, thanks, Julie. Yeah, thinking about the grievance and the solution, it goes hand in hand. So with that, we're near the end, unfortunately. This is, we could keep talking about it. There's so many aspects to discuss. And I just want to open it for both you, Stephanie and Julie, with any last last thoughts that you'd like to share, especially in light of, you know, we're day 7 of a new year. So as we think about our goals for this upcoming year, and we'll start with you, Stephanie.
So, so 2 things. One is, you know, in terms of plastic, nobody asked about this, Ben, and I should have mentioned it. We are in much worse shape. We're in much better shape in terms of climate emissions, you know, during this pandemic period, but we're in much worse shape in terms of plastic. Single-use plastic consumption has gone way up, and it's ending up in our waterways. It's ending up everywhere it shouldn't. I am a very big proponent of reusables, and I didn't have a chance to talk about takeout containers, which is another exciting area. But when the pandemic hit, the plastics problem became so big that in June, 125 epidemiologists, immunologists, medical professionals got together and signed a petition, signed a statement to say that contamination from the pandemic is not an issue, more of an issue on plastic than on any other surface. That the main thing for hygiene and avoiding the coronavirus is obviously to wash your hands after you touch any surface. And in fact, plastic is worse than some other surfaces. So I think it's important, and I really hope at the individual level, at the retail level, at the government level, that very soon we come back to where the track that we were on, which was reduce plastic by reusing containers, reusing your coffee cup and so forth. So I just wanted to say that, because I think that's been a big misconception about plastic. And the last thing I will say is I will publicly, and I therefore be held accountable to this, I made a resolution today thinking a little bit about this talk. We walk our dogs at least once a day, And every single time we go out, and we're in a nice neighborhood near Rock Creek, I always see trash. And I never pick it up now because of the pandemic. And so I made a decision today. I'm not going to leave home for the dog walk without a glove and a bag. And I will start throwing those things in, because it does make a difference. Those things will end up in the wrong place otherwise. So that's my commitment publicly.
Yeah, that's a great commitment for the year ahead. Julie,
thank you.
Any last thoughts?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation tonight. I think it's really important, and I think it was a nice distraction from everything else. And perhaps that, you know, taking some time tomorrow or this weekend to pick up some trash will make us all feel a little bit better, a little more connected to our neighborhoods, our community, and feel a little bit more optimistic about our futures. I will highlight that tomorrow in the Washington Post, the weekend section is going to have a feature about litter cleanups, including Rock Creek Conservancy and my office's programs. So check out that. We have the Office of the Clean City runs the Adopt a Block program so that anybody can sign up to take care of their block with regular cleanups. And we also will be having the mayor's annual spring cleanup on March 20th, where all we do is ask people to go pick up the trash in a place that they care about. It can be in front of your house for a couple of minutes, or you can go into a park for, you know, an event, socially distanced and safe and all of that. But yeah, I think really, you know, you can reduce your plastic in your home. You can learn about the proper ways to recycle. And make sure that you're disposing of your trash properly, and all of the benefit that that's going to have broadly on your community and downstream into the creek and the rivers. But then also just remembering that you can pick up the trash, and you can just make that part of your daily habit. That squatting while you're walking your dog is an extra cross-training benefit. We might call it plogging if you maybe are doing it while running. And so keep an eye out for events that we will be hosting. We've really enjoyed working with Rock Creek Conservancy over the last couple of years on creative cleanup opportunities, both pre-pandemic and during. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Julie. And so I just want to thank our discussants for joining us today for a timely discussion in the new year on waste. And I think what was great, we learned about the individual micro level that can make a dramatic impact on the collective macro level. And a special thanks to Rock Creek Conservancy for putting this wonderful talk together, inviting all of us. So with that, I will pass it to Jeannie.
Well, thank you, Seema, for moderating this discussion so brilliantly. You know, we have a rule at the Conservancy against what we call manels, which are panels of all men, which are an all too common occurrence. So I thank all three of you for making sure that does not happen here on our first virtual program of the year. I also want to just recognize, Stephanie, I am so inspired by the simple ways for busy lives that you have shared with us, and will pick something from that book to make a resolution for Rock Creek, and give great thanks always to the Office of the Clean City, but particularly Julie, for the ways in which the Office of the Clean City really helps organizations like the Conservancy make it easier for us to help volunteers like all of you on this call get out and help restore Rock Creek. And Stephanie, thanks so much for the connection to climate change. Climate is really exacerbating the big stresses on Rock Creek, which are the threat of invasive plants to our really fragile forests, and stormwater runoff. We're seeing these great big storms as a result of climate change, and that's bringing all this trash into the park, but all other sorts of other pollutants as well. So knowing that we can get a win-win by reducing our waste is really a wonderful opportunity for us all to help Rock Creek. Seema, you just brilliantly drank from your reusable water bottle, like as if on cue. Genius. So I hope that all of you will take a moment to be a Rock Creek steward, whether by plogging or the walking form of plogging, if you will, or by coming out and joining us Martin Luther King Day weekend of service for one of the many cleanups and other events that we'll be hosting, or just by getting out and enjoying Rock Creek. And if you see someone when you're enjoying Rock Creek, make them feel welcome in the park too. We all need a little kindness these days. So with that, I thank all of you for being here. If your question did not get answered and you'd really like a follow-up, feel free to email info@rockcreekconservancy.org, and we will try to get an answer from the appropriate expert for you or direct you to the resource that would make the most sense. And I want to thank everybody for spending a little bit of your Thursday with us. Have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.